I wore the necklace he gave me on our first anniversary. It was the one with the small, teardrop-shaped charm, gold, simple, expensive, in a way that made me feel guilty every time I touched it. I wore it to his funeral, the same chain, the same clasp I used to struggle with when he wasn't there to help me. And when I looked in the mirror that morning, something about that tiny piece of metal against my collarbone felt heavier than the grief everyone expected from me. I didn't cry, not when they called to tell me, not when they handed me his wedding band in a small plastic bag, not when I saw his body, pale and still and unfamiliar in that awful hospital light. People said I was in shock, that the tears would come later. I let them believe it, but the truth was, I had already done all my crying. I had cried every year, silently, while blowing out the candles on the anniversary cake he forgot to pick up. I cried when he missed our daughter's first recital because he had to work late and came home smelling like peppermint schnapps and someone else's perfume. I cried on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear, after yet another night of sleeping back to back in a bed that felt colder than the guest room. But no one sees those tears. They don't get counted. They vanish into towels and tissues and the back of closet doors. What they do see is the widow in navy blue, silent at the funeral, not even dabbing at her eyes. They think I'm made of stone, that I'm cold. But really, I'm just empty. The necklaces started the first year of our marriage, one each anniversary, always gold, always from the same jewelry store. He had the receipt saved in his email under a folder titled Auto Gifts. At first, I thought they meant something, that he knew me, that he wanted to mark the years like milestones. I would wear them all the time, to work, to church, even to bed. Then the fifth necklace came. It arrived late, with a rushed note. To my patient girl, I love you, always. That was the same year I found the lipstick in his glove compartment, bright coral, a shade I never wore. I remember standing in the driveway, holding that tube like a weapon, and not knowing whether to confront him or collapse. But I said nothing. I just wore the necklace. I started lining them up in my jewelry box like soldiers. 10, 11, 12. Each one smaller, thinner, as if he hoped I wouldn't notice the effort fading, as if the gold could blind me to the space growing between us. And maybe it did, because I stayed, year after year, necklace after necklace. I remember our daughter once asked me why I had so many chains. I smiled and said, "Daddy gives me one every year." She looked at them and said, "Like trophies?" I laughed, but it caught in my throat. Some nights, I would take them all out and lay them on the bed in a row. 17 years of silence, of compromise, of waiting for someone to turn back into who he once was. And then, the 18th year, there was no necklace, just a phone call, heart attack, sudden, quick. I didn't even ask if he was alone. The morning of the funeral, our daughter sat next to me in my bedroom, watching me get ready. She was 17, the same number as those necklaces, and already wiser than I ever was at that age. She handed me the first one, the teardrop. I hesitated, then clasped it on. It felt like closing a circle or locking a door. At the church, I didn't sit in the pew like a grieving wife. I sat like a historian, watching everyone rewrite him into someone I didn't quite recognize. He loved you so much. He was always so proud of you. He talked about your marriage like it was poetry. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both, but instead, I smiled. I thanked them, and I pressed my fingers against the charm at my throat. Cool, round, smooth. It didn't burn, it didn't weep, it just was. After the service, someone asked if I'd like to say a few words. I said no, because everything I ever wanted to say to him, I already had, in my mind, in the dark, in the quiet spaces between his lies. No, I didn't cry. I wore the necklace, and that was enough. The house was already old when we bought it. It had creaky wooden floors, narrow stairs, a slanted porch that dipped a little too far to the left. The paint was peeling in the hallway, the kitchen tiles mismatched. But I loved it. God, I loved it. It was the first place I ever walked into and thought, this is mine. Not borrowed, not temporary, not chosen for me. Ours. We were 24, newly married, and full of ideas we confused with certainty. He said we'd fix it up together, make it beautiful. He promised we'd repaint the walls, replace the sink, replant the front garden. 100 tiny renovations we never got around to. Still, we started with the kitchen. I picked yellow, a soft, buttery shade that made the morning light look warmer. He didn't care about the color, but he let me choose. I remember thinking that meant something. That maybe, in all the ways that mattered, he trusted me with our future. I remember the first year so vividly it hurts. Cooking pasta while he danced behind me, twirling me off-key as he hummed Sinatra with the windows open. Lying on the living room floor with our baby girl between us, watching the ceiling fan spin and wondering how we'd gotten so lucky. Him kissing my forehead after I cried from exhaustion, murmuring, "We're a team, babe. Always." I used to replay those memories like lullabies, but they don't sing me to sleep anymore. Now they echo. The first crack came quiet. A slammed door, an unanswered text. The first time he said, "I'm just tired," and I didn't know whether he meant from work or from me. He started staying out late, not wildly, not recklessly, just late, few hours, then more. At first, I made excuses for him, to myself. He's stressed, he's adjusting, he'll come back around. But the silence began to stretch between us, taut and unforgiving. The house noticed before I did. It began to feel colder. Not literally, but emotionally. The kind of cold that seeps into the walls. Not from drafts, but from distance. I stopped leaving candles out, stopped folding his socks the way he liked, stopped waiting at the window when I heard his car. I would walk through the house at night while he was gone, barefoot and sleepless, pausing at doorframes like they might speak some truth to me. I talked to myself in whispers, especially in the laundry room. The white noise helped me pretend I was less alone. Our daughter was too young to notice, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me for a little too long, like she could sense the absence in the spaces where presence used to live. You don't stop loving someone like a light switch. It's not that clean. It's a drip, a slow, steady leak. You try to plug it. You try to patch it, but it keeps coming. One night, I woke up and realized I hadn't laughed, really laughed, in months. We used to laugh, didn't we? Didn't we? The house became my witness, to my grief, to my hopes, to the 1,000 tiny concessions I made in the name of keeping something alive that was already wheezing. Even the yellow kitchen began to feel mocking, like a memory that refused to change with me. One night, After putting our daughter to bed, I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor in my nightgown, the refrigerator humming behind me, just sitting, not crying, not thinking, just existing. And the house creaked, a sound I once found charming, now sounding like an exhausted sigh. That was the night I realized something had shifted. Not in him, in me. I had stopped asking, stopped reaching, stopped hoping. We still shared the same bed, but it was just geography. We still made plans, but they were logistics. We still smiled in family photos, but I could never remember what we were smiling about. One weekend, I noticed he had installed a second lock on the office door, the one upstairs he used for work. He didn't mention it. I didn't ask. And that, perhaps, was the worst sign of all, that I no longer needed to know. Because when love fades, it doesn't announce its exit. It just turns off the lights and slips out quietly, leaving you sitting in a room with the furniture of your former life. The house held that room, and so many others. It became my secret keeper. It knew the exact spots on the hallway floor that creaked, the ones I avoided when checking on our daughter late at night so I wouldn't wake him. It knew how I would lean against the bathroom sink when I couldn't breathe. It knew the drawer in the kitchen where I kept a note to myself. Hold on, she's watching. Because she was, always. And so I did. I held on longer than I should have. For her, for the version of me that believed in us, for the hope that the man who danced in the kitchen might one day come home again. But the house knew better. It stopped waiting long before I did. And now that he's gone, the house doesn't feel empty. It feels honest, like something raw and sacred and entirely mine. It was a Thursday when I knew, not suspected, not wondered, knew. He came home late again, not drunk, not apologetic, just blank. He walked past me like I was furniture, didn't kiss my cheek, didn't look me in the eye. His keys dropped into the bowl by the door. His shoes left a trail of damp across the floor. I had made dinner, baked chicken, mashed potatoes, the green beans he used to love. He didn't even glance at the table. Not hungry, he muttered, already halfway up the stairs. I stood in the hallway, holding a towel in my hands, watching the shadow of his back disappear. And I thought, this is what the end of a marriage feels like. Not a scream, not a slam, just a quiet, persistent erosion. That night, I cleaned up without eating, put the dishes away in the dark. I sat at the table long after the food had gone cold. The steam vanished. The candles flickered out. The silence wrapped around me like a second skin. We had stopped sleeping at the same time by then. He stayed up late in the living room, lights low, the TV murmuring things I never listened to. I went to bed early, turning toward the wall, pretending I could still dream. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd wake to the sound of him whispering. Not prayers, not nightmares, just whispers. Once I got out of bed and walked halfway down the stairs. He was on the couch, phone pressed to his ear, voice soft and warm in a way I hadn't heard in years. I stood there in the shadows, breath held, not angry, just hollow. I didn't ask him who he was talking to, 'cause I already knew. There were signs, new passwords on his phone, a cologne I didn't recognize, shirts I hadn't seen him wear before, neatly folded in the drawer, and me, still making his coffee every morning, still packing his lunch when he had early meetings, still brushing crumbs from his coat when he left, like habit was love. I don't know what's worse, the betrayal or how long I allowed it to fester in the name of not wanting to know. I told myself it wasn't an affair unless he admitted it, unless I had proof, unless he left. So I kept going, kept pretending, kept performing. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean to be a woman who failed at forever. Afraid of telling our daughter that Daddy wasn't who she thought he was. Afraid of the way people would look at me like I'd lost something precious, when really I had just stopped lying to myself. But fear doesn't keep the truth away. It just buries it deeper. Until one day, the truth finds you anyway. It was laundry day, a Sunday. I was sorting clothes in the hallway, the usual routine. Socks, shirts, towels. His slacks had a receipt in the pocket. I pulled it out without thinking, ready to throw it away. But something stopped me. It was a hotel invoice, 2 nights, a suite, 2 breakfasts, 1 charge for champagne. I remember the font on the paper. I remember the date. It was the weekend I thought he was in Dallas for a sales conference. I sat on the edge of the bed holding that receipt, the washer humming in the background, my daughter playing in her room across the hall. I didn't scream, didn't cry. My hands trembled, but my heart was quiet, like it had been waiting. The moment I had feared for so long was here, and I wasn't destroyed. I was relieved, because now I didn't have to pretend anymore. Now the war inside me had a name. I got up, walked to the drawer where I kept that year's necklace, a simple gold heart with a tiny diamond in the center. He'd given it to me with a kiss on the forehead and a card that read, "To the one who knows me best." I took it out, stared at it in my palm, then slowly set it face down in the drawer. It didn't deserve the light. That night, I sat across from him at dinner. Our daughter talked about school and dance class and a girl who brought a hamster in her backpack. He smiled, nodded, ate the casserole I made without noticing that I hadn't touched mine. I watched him like a stranger, not with hatred, not even sadness, just clarity. I had loved a man who no longer existed. Maybe he never had. Later, after our daughter went to bed, he asked if something was wrong. I said no, and that was the biggest lie I had ever told. But I wasn't ready to burn the house down yet. Not when our daughter was sleeping in the next room. So I waited, and in that waiting, something inside me began to change. The woman who had begged, apologized, hoped. She started to disappear. She was quiet about it, graceful even. But she was gone. I packed a bag that night. Just a few things: jeans, socks, my daughter's favorite stuffed dog with the one missing ear. I folded them slowly, carefully, like a ritual. I didn't want to forget anything, but I also didn't want to take too much. I wasn't sure if I was leaving forever. I only knew I couldn't stay one more night in that house without doing something. It was late, maybe past 11. He wasn't home. Again. I stood in the doorway of my daughter's room, watching her sleep. She was so small, her hair fanned out on the pillow like sun rays. She made tiny sounds in her dreams, soft and innocent. I clutched the bag tightly. My hand went numb. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough to imagine the drive, the explanation, the phone calls, long enough to hear my mother's voice in my head, asking me what I expected when I married a man like him, long enough to picture the loneliness of a motel room with floral sheets and bad lighting, waiting for me on the other side. And then I heard the door. It clicked open, slow and casual. His keys landed in the dish by the hallway mirror. He didn't call out for me, didn't ask where I was, just walked into the kitchen and popped the fridge open like it was any other night. Like our marriage wasn't breaking apart one silent evening at a time. I froze, not from fear, from shame. Isn't that strange? I was the one planning to leave. I was the one carrying the weight of his betrayal. And yet, I felt like the one caught doing something wrong. That's what staying too long in a broken place does to you. It rewires your sense of guilt. I quietly placed the bag back into the closet. He never saw it, never asked about it. He grabbed a beer, turned on the TV, and didn't look at me once. I stared at the back of his head from the hallway and thought, "You're not even curious if I'm okay." But he wasn't cruel. That was the thing. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He didn't even lie well. He just disappeared, piece by piece, right in front of me. And because he didn't break me with violence, I kept telling myself he hadn't broken me at all. I slipped into bed beside him that night, like I always had, or used to. I turned my back toward him and stared at the wall. It felt like lying beside a stranger who had memorized all my soft spots, then chosen never to touch them again. But I couldn't sleep. Not because of rage, because of ache. The ache of knowing I'd surrendered my voice a long time ago, just to preserve something that looked like a life. I thought about my daughter, her smile, her drawings, the way she still called him Daddy, like he was her hero. I wondered how long I could protect her from the slow erosion happening inside our home. I wondered how long I could keep telling myself this wasn't damaging her. And then I wondered if I'd already failed. I stayed because I didn't know how to explain it to anyone. Because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. Because I didn't want to divide holidays or navigate custody or be pitied at school pickups. I stayed because he hadn't screamed, hadn't cheated out loud, hadn't left. And I stayed because I loved her more than I hated the distance. I told myself I was strong, that endurance was strength, that compromise was love. But in truth, I was surviving, not living, not choosing, just floating. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a clock with no hands. And I realized something. I had already left, emotionally, spiritually. I had walked out of that marriage long ago. I just hadn't moved my body yet, and I hated that realization. Hated that I had become the kind of woman who stayed so long she forgot how to leave. In the morning, he left early. A meeting, probably. Or maybe not. I didn't ask. I poured cereal for my daughter and watched her eat with her legs swinging under the table. She asked why my eyes were puffy. I told her I didn't sleep well. She nodded and offered me the last bite of her banana. And something broke in me. Not from pain, from love. The kind of love that says, "You're still here, you're still watching, you still matter." And that's when I decided I wasn't ready to leave yet. Not because of him, but because I needed to remember who I was first. Because I wanted to leave from strength, not from panic. So I stayed, not out of fear this time, but out of strategy. And that choice, quiet, calculated, mine, was the first step toward something different. Not freedom, not yet, but clarity. After that night, something inside me shifted. Not in a dramatic way, no slammed doors or packed bags, just quiet. A kind of resignation that wrapped itself around my ribs like a second skin. He still gave me necklaces, every year, without fail. The boxes came in blue velvet, the notes short and practiced. To my beautiful wife, to the one who makes it all possible, to forever. I used to memorize those messages. Later, I started forgetting them before I finished reading, but I wore the necklaces. I always wore them, because I didn't know what else to do. We became performers in a play no one was watching. He played the charming, tired husband. I played the graceful, understanding wife. We recited our lines over dinner. We smiled in public. We took photos on holidays and posted them with captions like grateful and family first. And sometimes it almost felt true. There were moments when I would catch myself laughing at something he said. Moments when I looked at him and saw the man I used to know. But they passed quickly, like flickers of a dream you wake from too soon. The rest of the time, we were ghosts. I learned how to laugh without hearing the joke, how to nod while thinking about grocery lists, how to touch his shoulder in public, just long enough to keep up the illusion. He began traveling more. Always work, always last minute. The trips blurred together. Dallas, Chicago, Denver. I stopped asking questions I didn't want answers to. Instead, I started counting the nights I slept alone. 1, 3, 5. By the 7th, I stopped keeping track. I told myself he wasn't cheating. I told myself that even if he was, it didn't matter anymore. The betrayal wasn't in his actions. It was in his absence, in how he looked through me instead of at me, in how he stopped noticing when I cried during movies, in how he never touched me unless someone else was watching. And yet, I kept making his coffee, kept folding his shirts the way he liked, kept pretending his cologne didn't make me flinch, because routine is powerful, and pretending becomes muscle memory when you've done it long enough. I started keeping a journal, hidden behind the cleaning supplies under the sink. I didn't write poetry or questions, just facts. Didn't speak to each other today. He left his plate in the sink. I cried folding laundry. It sounds bleak, but it was honest. And honesty, even in secret, felt like oxygen. One afternoon at the library, I met a woman named Lorraine. She was older than me, maybe by 10 years, with kind eyes and a laugh that made you want to sit closer. Our daughters became fast friends, which meant we often shared benches, coffee, silence. She asked me once how long I'd been married. I told her, 17 years. She nodded like she already knew the rest, and then, one day, while our girls were coloring inside, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You don't have to stay just because you've stayed this long." It felt like someone had exhaled for me. I didn't respond, just stared at her and nodded, too quickly, because I wasn't ready to say it out loud, not even to myself. But her words lingered, like a warm hand on the small of my back, gently nudging me toward something I didn't yet have the courage to want. Still, I didn't leave. I wasn't brave yet. I wasn't angry enough. I wasn't numb enough. I was still somewhere in the middle, aching, aching, aching. I wore the necklaces. I tucked in my daughter. I folded myself into the shape of a woman who was fine. He started noticing. Not me, just the difference. He asked if I was okay more often, started calling when he was out of town, started watching me across the dinner table like I was a puzzle he no longer had the pieces to solve. But it was too late, because I had already started becoming someone else. Someone who didn't flinch at silence, someone who didn't wait for the apology, someone who stopped performing. I wasn't healed, I wasn't free, but I was waking up, and the woman he had learned to ignore, she was gone. So when the call came, when his heart failed without warning, I wasn't surprised. They said it was sudden, that he didn't feel a thing. I wish I could say the same, because when the nurse handed me the bag with his wedding ring, I didn't feel devastation. I felt stillness, not peace, not relief, just the still, cold clarity of something ending. I went home, opened the jewelry box, and looked at the 17 necklaces he gave me. Each one a year I survived, each one a promise broken. And I realized I didn't need the 18th. The funeral was on a Wednesday. It was overcast, gray, and oddly warm for early spring. The sky hung low like a wet blanket, and everything felt muted, like the world was speaking in whispers. Our daughter wore black for the first time. She didn't say much. I braided her hair that morning with shaking hands, trying to act like this was just another day. She looked at me in the mirror and asked, "Will people cry?" I said, "Yes, probably." She didn't ask if I would. She already knew. The church was full. Neighbors, colleagues, his golf friends, people I hadn't seen in years. They all came, suited up, mascara ready, ready to mourn the version of him they knew. And they wept. Real tears, the kind that come from stories and snapshots, the kind you shed for someone you loved from a distance, in the neat, filtered way love can sometimes be remembered. He was such a good man. He talked about you and your daughter all the time. He adored his family. He lit up when he said your name. I nodded. I smiled. I said thank you. What else could I do? They didn't know the silence at our dinner table. They didn't know how many anniversaries I spent alone. They didn't see the way he stopped looking at me, not out of cruelty, but apathy. He didn't leave bruises. He left emptiness. And that's harder to talk about. I sat in the front pew while the priest spoke. He said words like faithful, committed, loving. Each one fell like a grain of sand piling on my chest. Our daughter squeezed my hand once, gently. She didn't cry either. People kept watching me, waiting for the breakdown, as if grief has a shape, a volume, a performance, as if I owed them tears. But I had cried in silence for years. I had wept in the pantry, the bathroom, behind the closed bedroom door at night. No one asked about those tears. No one ever does. They asked if I wanted to speak. A few words, maybe. A memory. I shook my head. What could I say? That I loved the man I married, but not the man who died. That our marriage was a photo album, beautiful on the outside, empty on the back. Instead, I walked to the casket when it was time, laid a single white lily on top. I didn't touch him, didn't kiss his forehead, didn't linger. I looked at his face, the face I once held at 2 a.m. in laughter, in hunger, in forgiveness. And all I could think was, you left long before your heart stopped beating. After the burial, everyone came back to the house. They brought casseroles, pound cakes, and wine. They tried to laugh through the ache, told stories about vacations and poker nights. They toasted him. They toasted us. I played hostess. I poured drinks, refilled trays, thanked people for coming. I kept moving so I wouldn't have to feel. And when the last guest left and the front door clicked shut, the silence came roaring back. I looked around the living room, half-eaten desserts, lipstick on wine glasses, wilting lilies in a vase. And I realized something. I didn't miss him. Not really. What I missed was the possibility of him, the man I thought he could become, the man he once was, briefly, and I grieved that. I walked through the house, turning off lights. When I got to the bedroom, I stood in the doorway for a long time. It smelled the same. His sweater still hung on the chair. His book lay open on the nightstand, half read, as if he planned to finish it. But he wouldn't. And in that stillness, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened all the windows, let the air in, let the past out. It was evening by then. The wind smelled like soil and rain. Curtains danced lightly as the house inhaled. And I sat on the edge of the bed, not crying, not broken, just empty in a way that felt honest. And when I finally laid down, I slept, not the watchful sleep of a wife waiting to hear the garage door, not the fractured sleep of someone pretending to rest. I slept deeply, like a woman who no longer had to carry someone else's absence. And when I woke up in the morning, sunlight spilled across the floor in long, quiet lines. It felt like something had shifted. Not peace, not yet, but space. A space inside me where he used to live. A space I could finally call my own. The days after the funeral moved slowly. Time lost its structure. It bled from 1 hour into the next, like ink in water. I forgot what day it was. I made coffee and left it untouched. I let the answering machine pick up. I folded towels with no memory of having washed them. Everything felt heavy and strangely quiet. People stopped calling after the first week. The casseroles stopped showing up. Sympathy cards curled at the edges on the mantel, untouched. Grief is loud at first, then it becomes a hum, then silence. I thought I'd feel free, and in some ways, I did. There was no more waiting to hear the garage door, no more flinching at sudden keys in the lock, no more adjusting myself, my voice, my opinions, my shape, to accommodate his absence. But freedom, it turns out, is complicated. It didn't feel like open sky. It felt like a hollow room. A room where everything echoed, even my thoughts. I didn't miss him. Not the man he became, but I missed the idea of him. The version I used to dream of. The one I thought would come back. I missed being seen. Even if it was only in my imagination. I found myself reaching for my phone more than once, to text him a picture of our daughter, or a joke I knew he'd once have laughed at. And then I remembered. He wasn't there to reply. Not because he left me, because he left, period. I would sit at the kitchen table and stare at the chair he used to take, the one closest to the window, the one he always pulled out with the same scrape across the tile. And sometimes I'd find myself talking, not loudly, just little murmurs, little things I never got to say. I told the air what I wished he'd known, that I tried, that I stayed, that I stopped crying not because I stopped feeling, but because it hurt too much to keep bleeding. One afternoon, I started sorting the closet. It wasn't intentional. I had gone in for a sweater and ended up pulling down the box from the high shelf. Inside were old photos, postcards, receipts, and a bundle of small white cards. The cards, the ones that came with the necklaces. I had always assumed he threw his away, but he hadn't. He kept them, every single one, folded, faded, curled at the edges, tied with a string like they were something sacred. To my forever. You make everything better. I don't deserve you. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and read them one by one. My throat closed. My chest tightened. And then, quietly, tears came. They didn't fall in sobs. They slid down slowly, like rain down a window, soft and persistent. But I wasn't crying for him. I was crying for her. The version of me who read those cards and believed them. The woman who stood in front of the mirror, trying on necklace after necklace, and hoping they meant something more than they did. I missed her, her hope, her belief, her softness. I stayed on the closet floor for a long time. The house was silent except for the distant sound of wind against the windows. I wrapped myself in a cardigan and just let the stillness hold me. That night, I took out a notebook, one I hadn't touched in years. The first page was blank. The second had a line written across it. Don't forget who you are when they stop looking at you. It was my handwriting. I didn't remember writing it, but I knew it was mine. And I cried again, because I had forgotten. Not all at once, but gradually, the way fog hides a mountain, inch by inch, moment by moment. I lit a candle on my nightstand, not for him, for me. And I wrote on a new page, I'm still here, just that, nothing more. But it was enough. After the tears came silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like space. There was room to breathe now, not because I had healed, not yet, but because the pretending had stopped. I started rearranging the furniture, not because anything was broken, but because I needed the house to look as different on the outside as I felt on the inside. I moved his favorite chair out of the living room, donated his old books, emptied the drawer he always kept locked, the one I had never dared to open. Inside were receipts, paperwork, loose change. Nothing dramatic, just proof that even his secrets were ordinary. I painted the bathroom a pale green I'd always loved. He once said it was too cold. Now it looked like breath, like mint and morning. It wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. I played music while I cooked, lit candles in the afternoon, wore soft clothes that made me feel like I was hugging myself. No one saw. That was the best part. I wasn't performing anymore. I started talking to myself again. Not the whispering, not the frantic kind. Just conversations. Little things. Nice job today. That's enough cleaning. You're okay. I was still sad, still bruised in places no one could see. But I wasn't waiting anymore. And in a way, that felt like flight. I opened the windows every morning, let light spill onto the wooden floors, the rugs we bought on sale, the cracked coffee table he always meant to fix. I let the wind move through the curtains without trying to shut it out. Some nights were harder than others. The bed still felt too big. Memories clung to corners like dust you forgot to sweep. But there was no more pretending, no more smoothing over tension, no more shrinking. I began to make new routines. I bought a new mug, pale blue with a chipped handle, and made tea in it every evening. I journaled, not about pain, but about presence. I wrote things like, felt sunlight on my face at 3:14 p.m., cut up a peach for no reason and ate it slowly, heard birdsong from the maple tree. I walked barefoot around the house, let the wood press into my heels. I bought fresh sheets, dug out an old recipe I loved before I ever met him, and cooked it just for me. I set the table with care, a plate, a napkin, a glass of wine, and I sat down, not across from anyone, just with myself. I didn't cry. I didn't toast. I didn't pretend. I just ate, slowly, and for the first time in years, I felt full. Our daughter came back from my sister's house 2 weeks later. She ran into the house like she'd never left, scattering her drawings, her backpack, her questions. She hugged me like she hadn't seen me in years. Maybe she hadn't. Not this version of me. That night, she crawled into bed beside me. She smelled like cinnamon and crayons and shampoo. She said, "I miss Daddy." I said, "Me too." And it was true. But I didn't say he was perfect. I didn't say everything was fine. I just held her. And in the dark, I whispered, "We're okay now." Because we were. Not healed, not whole, but okay. And that, I was learning, was enough. One afternoon, I found an old notebook buried in the back of the linen closet. It was mine. The cover was worn soft from years of being tucked away, and the pages smelled like dust and lavender. I flipped it open, and there it was, my handwriting, unmistakable. The first few pages were dreams, a list of places I wanted to visit, a recipe I clipped from a magazine, a sketch of a room I once wanted to design. Then came a line I didn't remember writing. Don't forget who you are when they stop looking at you. I stared at that sentence for a long time. It was like a voice from a past life had reached through the paper to remind me. You weren't always this tired. You weren't always invisible. That night, after my daughter had gone to bed and the house was still, I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook and a pen, and I wrote a letter. Not to the man who died, to the man who left, long before his heart gave out. It started simply, "I don't hate you." Then slowly, the rest came. I wanted us to be different. I stayed longer than I should have, not because I was weak, but because I believed in you. And when you stopped seeing me, I started disappearing. I shrank in places you never looked. I smiled so you wouldn't ask questions. I broke myself quietly so you wouldn't have to. The words kept coming, faster, hotter. I stopped dreaming. I stopped singing. I stopped being someone I would have liked to know. And then, I forgive you, not because you asked, not because you earned it, but because I want my hands back. I want my heart back. I want the rest of my life back. When I finished, I folded the letter and held it against my chest. It trembled a little. So did I. I didn't burn it. I didn't shred it. I placed it in the very back of my jewelry box, beneath the last layer of velvet and tissue, behind the false bottom I once used to hide a pregnancy test. And then I opened the top drawer. The necklaces were there, all 17, each one carefully stored, still in the blue boxes, still lined with the small notes he had written. To my forever, still yours. You make me whole. I laid them out across the table, one by one. They glittered under the kitchen light like little pieces of memory. The first one, the teardrop, felt the heaviest. The last one, the heart, felt the most hollow. I touched each clasp, ran my fingers along the chains. Let them tangle. Let them speak. I thought of all the birthdays, all the missed anniversaries, all the nights I cried while wearing one of them, hoping it would remind me that I was still loved. And then I placed them in a donation box. All but one. The first, the teardrop. That one I took outside. It was just past dusk. The garden was quiet. The rose bush I planted last spring had started to bloom again. Pale pink petals, soft as apology. I dug a small hole beneath it with my bare hands. The soil was damp and cool, and there, in the earth, I buried the necklace. No ceremony, no drama, just the quiet, solemn act of laying something down, something I had carried for far too long. When I stood up, my palms were covered in soil. My heart, somehow, felt cleaner. I looked up at the sky. It was dark, but not heavy. The stars were beginning to show. Back inside, I washed my hands and poured a glass of water. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt real. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, I looked at my reflection and didn't feel the urge to explain anything. I had done something for myself. I had said goodbye, and that was enough. People still ask why I didn't cry at his funeral. They ask with soft eyes and tilted heads, like maybe they missed something, like maybe they think I'm still in shock. "I'm sure it'll hit you one day," someone said. "I can't imagine how strong you must be," said another. But strength has nothing to do with it. Grief is not always tears. It's not always wailing into a pillow or collapsing in someone's arms. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes grief is the sound of a drawer closing with a necklace still inside, the feel of his shirt still hanging in the closet because you haven't yet decided what to do with it, the silence at the breakfast table where he used to sit, tapping his spoon just a little too loud. I didn't cry at his funeral because I had already grieved. Not just once, but in layers, over years, in pieces. I grieved when I stopped feeling his eyes on me across a room, when I heard him laugh louder with strangers than he did with me, when he walked in and didn't ask how my day was, and I realized I no longer expected him to. I grieved on anniversaries, blowing out candles alone, in the bathroom with the faucet running, whispering into a towel, in the car, parked down the street, just breathing. By the time his heart gave out, mine had already let go. And when they lowered him into the ground, there were no more tears to give. Instead, there was breath, stillness, and a strange, aching relief. In the weeks that followed, I was surprised by how much life returned in his absence. Not joy, not yet, but color. I noticed the birds again. I smelled cinnamon in the market and stopped to breathe it in. I started wearing my hair differently, not for anyone, just because it felt new. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror and saw myself. Not his wife, not the widow, just me, a woman who had survived a quiet war, a woman who stayed longer than she should have and still managed to leave. I found my daughter drawing one afternoon at the table. She looked up and said, "You smile more now." I said, "I know." And it wasn't a secret I had to keep. We talked about him sometimes. The parts that were good, the parts I wished had stayed. I never painted him as perfect. I didn't need to. She didn't ask if I cried. She saw the garden where the rose bush bloomed. She saw the drawer that stayed closed. She saw the candle I lit in the mornings. Not for mourning, but for light. Some wounds don't bleed. They bruise. They swell and retreat and pulse just beneath the surface. But they heal, too. Slowly. Honestly. If you let them. Now, when I open the windows, I don't brace for anything. I let the wind come. I let the air move through the house like a song. I water the plants. I dance in the kitchen again, barefoot and unhurried. I make my bed with 2 pillows, but only use one. And it doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like space. Space I filled with myself. I'm not bitter, not broken. I'm just awake. And that, in the end, is why I didn't cry. Because I had already mourned him. because I had already mourned the version of me that thought crying was the only way to prove something mattered. Because when I stood at that grave, in navy blue and dry-eyed, I knew something no one else did, that I was finally ready, not to move on, but to live